Okay, welcome and thank you for joining us for tonight's CLA webinar, the Data Center Boom, Water, Energy, and Community Impacts. My name is Jackie Goodrum, and I'm the Associate Director of Legal Education for Chesapeake Legal Alliance, or CLA. A couple of notes before our speakers introduce themselves. First, please note that tonight's webinar is being recorded. All registrants will receive a copy of the recording via email following the webinar. And second, we will have a time for questions after the presentation portion of the webinar. If you have a question, you can put it in the Q&A or in the chat during the webinar, but just know we won't be responding to it right away. With that being said, it's time for our presenters to introduce themselves. Morgana.
Hi, folks. My name is Morgana Omaliki. I am a staff attorney and the pro bono coordinator for Chesapeake Legal Alliance.
Great. Thanks, Morgana. Angie.
Hi all, I'm Angie McCarthy. I'm the Clean Energy Campaign Manager for Nature Forward. We're one of the oldest environmental nonprofits in the DMV.
Awesome. Thank you. Kyle.
Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Kyle Hart. I'm the Senior Program Manager for the Mid-Atlantic region of the National Parks Conservation Association, or NPCA. And we are a national parks advocacy group, and I am based in Richmond, Virginia.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. We are thrilled to have these excellent expert speakers tonight, and I'm going to turn things over to Morgana to kick us off.
Awesome. Thank you, Jackie. All right. So this webinar was prompted by an increasing number of requests for legal assistance related to data centers. I do all the intake calls for CLA, and we had 4 times the number of data center related requests in 2026 than in 2025. So it shows that this problem is getting more intense and more people are getting involved. And so to get us started, I'm just going to focus on what a data center is, some of the major environmental impacts, and where the law comes into play. So what is a data center? A data center is a facility that houses computer systems that are used to store, process, manage, and distribute large amounts of data. It will usually have lots of servers, data storage equipment, networking systems, cooling systems, and also sometimes backup energy generators. Data centers have been around for a while. They're not new, but with the increase in AI over the last few years, there is more demand for data to feed into AI. And as a result, the number of data center projects and the size of data centers have increased. Next slide, please, Jackie. So what are the impacts of these data centers? This is certainly not an exhaustive list, but I will focus on the 3 following areas. So first, water. Data centers need to use a lot of water. For the most part, they need water to cool down their systems. All those computers and servers, they generate a lot of heat. And so they need water to cycle through the system to keep things from overheating. There are various techniques and types of systems used to cool down data centers. I won't go into the details because I'm not an expert on that, but most of them require copious amounts of water. Data centers can obtain that water from various sources like public drinking water systems, groundwater, surface water. These shared water supplies are also some of the ones that serve residential areas, agriculture, businesses. And so as a result, data centers add to the demand for water resources. And on top of all this, when data centers that need to get rid of the water that do discharge water after it goes through their system, that discharge from the facility can contain chemicals or pollutants that may be harmful to whatever body of water that they just discharge into, and that can impact water quality. That water, after being going through the cooling system, can also be very warm, which can also cause negative impacts to a water body's temperature. Next is energy. So AI and data centers have dramatically increased electricity demand. A single data center campus can often require hundreds of megawatts of power, and that can be a very, very large stressor on the grid, and it can oftentimes be something more than a local grid can supply. And so in order to meet that demand, it requires It has required new energy infrastructure to be built out. And so new substations, transmission lines, battery energy storage, all these different things have started to also be built alongside data center development. So not only does new infrastructure impact the areas where they're being built, but the energy demand and a lack of local grid reliability, it has also led to a fallback to fossil fuels just to keep up with energy demands. And this obviously takes away from progress towards climate goals in general. And then lastly, community and land impacts. So data centers are reshaping landscapes. They are putting increased pressure on rural agricultural land. They impact historic and cultural resources. They impact sensitive habitats. They encroach on environmental justice communities and indigenous lands. And having a data center pop up near your home can affect potable water, increase power outages, cause noise and light pollution. Even the expansion of data center energy infrastructure can lead to impacts like transmission lines cutting through people's properties or through farms. And there's more of those types of concerns, but as data center development continues to expand, understanding these various impacts is essential for making informed decisions about how some of these projects might be able to be challenged. Next slide, please. So the legal background, just for people's information, the Virginia League of Conservation Voters recently released a poll that showed that 72% of Virginians believe the data center industry needs to be more regulated and have more oversight. And then here in Maryland, 75% of Marylanders now live in counties or cities that have data center bans or moratoriums. So as you can see, these projects are increasingly unpopular and are frequently becoming the subject of various legal challenges. So here I listed a few areas where the law can come into play. Again, it's not an exhaustive list, but it just gives some information. So before constructing a data center, developers frequently will seek rezoning, they'll seek special exception applications. And so depending on the county or the municipality that is issuing zoning or exception approvals, there can be opportunities for people to start their fight against a site within that process. Another one is environmental permitting. This can become a major issue where a project impacts wetlands, forests, streams, or stormwater management systems. There is a very wide range of permits that data centers may need to obtain in order to construct their facility, discharge into waterways, withdraw the water, clear forests, or build on a wetland. And so these are also significant opportunities to challenge a site because a number of those permit approvals can be subject to judicial review. Next is public utility regulation or energy infrastructure. Like I said, new transmission lines, substations, battery storage, all these things are being built out alongside data center development. And these projects will require separate regulatory approvals, often by the Public Service Commission. And this can also offer a different venue for affected people to get involved, to show their opposition or to voice their opinions on a particular project. And just in general, these data center projects increasingly involved administrative hearings, judicial review of permitting decisions, and just overall litigation over land use approvals and other ways. But that is a very quick rundown of the background on this. And so with that, I will now hand it over to Angie to talk about what's going on in Maryland.
Thanks, Morgana. Hi all, again, Angie McCarthy with Nature Forward. I also have the esteemed pleasure of hosting the Marylanders for Data Center Reform Coalition, which is a statewide coalition made up of 65 environmental and community nonprofits focused on statewide reform of data centers. Next slide, please. Before we jump too much in, I just wanted to do a little bit of level setting about what's been going on in Maryland. It's summer right now, which should be the not busy season, but it doesn't feel like that because so much happened last General Assembly. Next slide, please. So going into the 2026 General Assembly, which runs from about January to March, Marylanders for Data Center Reform and Nature Forward had some of the issues that Morgana was just talking about in mind. So transparency, grid reliability, resource adequacy, the impact on ratepayers, as well as just this notion that is getting more and more popular as folks learn about data centers, but ensuring that developers and the tech giants that are funding data centers pay their fair share. And how we thought about this last legislative session was through the lens of several of the bills that you see on the screen here. And for the Marylanders within the group, hopefully some of these bills sound familiar, but each of them was aimed at addressing a portion of data center impacts. And as you might be able to tell, data centers are really just a behemoth of a resource use, and it takes many different types of legislation to address all of their different impacts, which hopefully we can go into a little bit more later. But next slide. Wanted to give you all a little bit of a primer on the largest piece of legislation that's been passed addressing data centers, and that was the Utility Relief Act. And what should be noted about the Utility Relief Act, which was a large omnibus bill that was made up of probably over 15 different energy and environmental bills, this was not supposed to be a renewable energy or environmental protection bill. This was simply to alleviate short-term energy pain that's happening. And that was coming from leadership, that was coming from Governor Wes Moore, as well as Bill Ferguson and Speaker Penny Melnick. And what we saw out of this was a couple different things. One, this is the second year that we had a large omnibus bill, or a zombie bill, or I've heard it called the Voltron bill, depending on what decade you were in middle school. But this bill is kind of leading to a lot of us to believe that this how data centers are going to be regulated is changing the very fabric of how we do General Assembly. Next slide, please. So relief was really important in terms of the data center fight because it defined and established these four terms that you see up on the screen: a large load customer, the clean capacity program, the large load registry, and a cut down on speculative rate setting. And I just wanted to go through these terms because they're really the foundational aspects of how we can start regulating data centers. So the first one, the large load customer, it changed the definition of a large load customer or an electricity customer that uses an exceptionally large amount of power, such as a data center. The old definition of that used to be 100 megawatts with an 80% load factor. This definition is now 25 megawatts and a 60% load factor. So when we're talking about the difference between 100 megawatts and 25 megawatts, that is the difference between hundreds of thousands of acres of solar, which is seemingly impossible with how much land we have, to something that is hopefully more manageable, but still needs to be planned for. This definition of a large load customer also allowed for more regulation and oversight. The Clean Capacity Program, which was something that was one of our priorities for the coalition, was looking into a voluntary clean capacity program, which meant that we were prioritizing, that Maryland would prioritize data centers that would bring their own clean energy, that would use battery storage, and that would implement a demand response program to decrease energy usage during peak hours of interconnection, and would also help make the permitting process a little bit cleaner. The large load registry is something that has been kicking up a lot of dust in many of our email boxes because the PSC, the Public Service Commission, has been debating how to implement the large load registry. And this would require proposed data centers to report their proposed energy usage, their water usage, their size, and other relevant information to the state agencies, as well as the PSC. What is important to note is that the large load registry would provide data in aggregate versus data center by data center by data center in terms of what information was amalgamated for them. And then finally, speculative rate testing is a practice that is often used in spending forecasts that inflate and incentivize overestimating on the part of the data center developers, and that has really led to a lot of increasing rates for ratepayers. And what Relief did was ban forecast test years for 1 year, where in that year they're going to perform a study to find a better rate setting practice that would be in the actual best interest of ratepayers. So those are just four things I wanted to go over within Relief because I think they're really important pieces of policy. But as we go through the program today, you can start to see where this is just one small drop in the ocean in terms of how we can best mitigate data centers' impact. Next slide, please. So switching gears away from the state and now to county level moratoria, wanted to kind of put up a list of the current moratorium bans that are happening across the state of Maryland right now. And as I was putting together this list, I was like, man, something is going to happen between 5 and 6 p.m. that is going to make a point on here just no longer correct. And I was right about that. I think Montgomery County just started a 18-month moratorium that came out of their subcommittees. So just look at this list and think about it more as a theoretical list of moratorium, not an accurate one. And what I wanted to note is just how every single county is having to grapple with data center growth right now, and each of them are taking it up in a different way. For example, in Prince George's County, it is a 2-year ban, but it leaves the door open for the passage of more data center friendly zoning and planning bills. And it actually opens up more areas in the county for by right development. In Montgomery County, as I said, there's now talk of an 18-month moratorium, but it's also being challenged by the developer of the current proposed Montgomery County data center because the legislation was not in place when they were first asking for their permits. In Frederick County, there's a 6-month pause by the county executive. And in Harford County, they have their first official ban, but that's being challenged by a developer. So all of these points are very much in flux. And I put a little screen grab of the news about these different moratoria going around the state because I think it is helpful to contextualize how quickly all of these regulations and zoning text amendments and how quickly they're being propped up because counties are doing their best to try and mitigate the effects as they're learning about them. And something I like to say with my team and when we're working in data center land is that we are often building the airplane as we're flying it, and you can see the counties starting to react to some of that speculation and to a lot of the different news coverage that's being provided. Next slide, please. Oh, I had a next steps slide, but really for that, all I wanted to say. Oh, go ahead,
Go
Jackie.
ahead. No, go ahead,
Okay.
Angie. Sorry.
I was just gonna say that in terms of next steps, really what I'm keeping my eye on is ensuring that the Maryland Data Center study that passed last General Assembly has good community input. And so that was something that our coalition has really worked on. We're also looking to develop more legislative priorities for upcoming General Assembly. And through that, we hope to include moratoria as part of a tool belt of regulation. It's not the end all. By definition, a moratorium is a pause. It's not a permanent ban, and we want to ensure that counties and the states are protected through permanent regulation. So that was it, but thank you.
All right, Kyle.
Awesome. Thank you. We can, of course, move along. Kyle Hart, National Parks Conservation Association. Good to be with you all tonight. Next slide. So I called this presentation "So You Want to Stop a Data Center Project?" So I thought I would kind of give that's the question we hear a lot that I'm sure Jackie and CLA hear a lot, that Angie hear a lot. You hear about a project in your neighborhood and you're like, how do we stop it? And so, as someone who recently successfully helped stop a pretty massive data center project in Virginia, I thought I would kind of give you a rundown of like what it takes, what it looks like, and give you some tricks of the trade as someone who's been doing this for 5.5 years now. And so the reality of the situation, I don't think this will come as a surprise to anybody. Data center developers are exceptionally well funded and well connected. I mean, we're talking, cumulatively, the 10 richest corporations that have ever walked this planet. We're talking Amazon, we're talking Google, we're talking Meta, a lot of these other data center developers, these co-locators. So a big one is QTS Data Centers. They're a subsidiary of BlackRock, which is obviously one of the largest wealth holding sort of financial firms in the country. Um, they promise local governments tax revenue or revitalization of their local economy. They point to examples of other local governments that have data centers that have built new schools or given their police officers and firefighters raises. Um, and that is attractive to lawmakers. They commit to, though we rarely see it happen, lower taxes for residents. So they promise the world, and that is appealing to local decision makers. Um, Developers and boards of supervisors almost always, without fail, know about a project before you do. No matter how well informed you are, developers have had meetings behind the scenes with planning offices, with boards of supervisors members before you know about a project. Uh, I don't know if this is always true anymore, but it definitely felt this way 3 years ago. By the time we heard about a data center project, the developer had already gone behind the scenes and secured yes votes from a majority of the board. We were playing catch up from day one. We were already behind the eight ball. On top of that, non-disclosure agreements actively shield information, including the name of the project developer, water information, energy use information. And so we're always swimming upstream. And of course, as I'm about to go over, projects can take sometimes 4 or 5 years to play out from zoning through legal challenges. That takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of money. But you can win. We have won. People are winning all over the country. And so we'll talk a little bit about this is an exceptional case study, but it is a good case study. So next slide, please. And then, yeah. So this is a project called the Prince William Digital Gateway. At the time this project was proposed, way back in the early spring of 2021 in Prince William County, Virginia, it was the largest data center campus in the world. There are now projects that are bigger than this, but for a while it held that title at 2,133-acre campus, outlined in red on the map there. It was directly adjacent to Manassas National Battlefield Park, which was, of course, the reason we were so concerned and opposed. There's other communities there, Conway Robinson State Forest. The land is essentially at this time large lot residential, so 10 acres, and then lots of like small horse farms, cattle farms, hay farms, that sort of stuff. So 2,133 acres. There was about 200 different landowners, I think, in that parcel. So, average lot size of 20 acres, I think, if I'm doing my math right there. Um, the project was 23 million square feet of build out, 37 buildings, with like a dozen substations, new power lines. We estimated, though it was never formally disclosed, 4.4 to 6 gigawatts of energy. 1 gigawatt of energy is like one nuclear reactor, so a significant amount. They never disclosed water use, and so that remains unknown. very, very difficult to sort of pin that number down. It was three separate rezoning cases, which made it even more complicated. So it was three rezonings, one project. Next slide. So this is like a timeline. So like to tell you how long this took, right? So it was the spring of 2021. The project was first proposed with a comprehensive plan amendment. And that sort of kicked off the process in spring of 2021. The CPA went through sort of the county process. So we opposed this. There was a public hearing for the CPA initiation vote. There was a CPA for the actual approval. As soon as the CPA was approved, they submitted a rezoning application. So then we sort of turned to fighting the actual rezoning applications. And this is kind of where it gets interesting. Summer of 2023, the board chair of the county, a Democrat named Ann Wheeler, who was like the project's big champion, lost a primary election. And that sent shockwaves through sort of the political system. And all of a sudden, the developers had until December 31st, 2023 to get this project passed. That was their hard stop. They knew they did not have the votes on January 1, 2024. So they spent the next 6 months basically cramming through an incomplete rezoning application. The county staff repeatedly said this application is not done. We don't have all of the information. They said, we don't care. We want to vote. County staff, for that reason, recommended denial. The Planning Commission recommended denial. We get to a board vote in December of 2023. The board hearing took 27 hours, nonstop. So we started at 10 a.m. on December 12th, 2023, and did not wrap up until 1 p.m. On December 13th, the next day. So they ran, it was a long rezoning, more than 300 people testified. And then, of course, they voted to approve it anyways, as quite frankly, a lot of people expected them to do, even though county staff, planning commission, the large majority of people that commented publicly said, please don't do this. Immediately after that, January 2024, lawsuits were filed. First lawsuit, there were two lawsuits filed, one by the American Battlefield Trust and another by the Oak Valley Homeowners Association and HOA. In February 2025, the first lawsuit was dismissed. But then in June 2025, the second lawsuit prevailed in circuit court, where a circuit court judge essentially sided with the opposition to the project and said, yeah, y'all violated some laws. And so that, of course, was a big victory. A year and a half later, we got a ruling out of the Virginia Appeals Court, which is a three-body panel, three-judge panel, a step above the circuit court. That was a unanimous decision where they agreed with sort of our side and said, yeah, these rezonings are valid. You did not follow the law. In April of 2026, the county and one of the two developers sort of dropped their appeal. And then just recently, July 2026, beginning of this month, July 2nd, the last remaining developer, QTS Data Centers, dropped their sort of appeal to the Virginia Supreme Court, and the project is dead. The lawsuit was based entirely, essentially, on very procedural level stuff. And so it's very difficult to recreate. So I'm just like framing it, but this is what what they based their lawsuit on. The first was proper advertisement in the local newspaper. Because we were around the holidays, Virginia, mistakes were made. So Virginia has state code that requires rezoning applications to be published along sort of a certain timeline so that the public is aware of the project. Their first advertisement for the public did not get published when they needed it to, and so they were out of alignment with state and county code. And then the second big thing was this was a huge rezoning, or three rezonings, probably 5,000 or 6,000 pages in total. And according to county code, they are supposed to have that publicly available. So if you show up to the county office and say, hey, I'd like a copy of the rezoning, they're supposed to be able to provide it to you the day that they publish the hearing. So some people went down to the planning office, and as we kind of expected, they didn't have the documents. And that was a violation of county code. So they documented that. People signed affidavits that said it wasn't available. Even county planning staff acknowledged on the record that it wasn't available. And several judges ruled that they violated the law and overturned the rezoning. So the courts obviously are our last option. Of course, your best bet is to get a board of supervisors to just vote a project down or convince a developer to walk away from a project. But courts remain sort of a good option. So we'll move on to the next slide. So what worked and why? So one, we had a long runway, right? And that was partially unique to this case because they had to undergo a comprehensive plan amendment. And so that cost them a year and change of project development and gave us multiple opportunities for public comment. It Also, being such a huge rezoning, took a significant amount of work from county planning and staff time. So the longer the runway you have, the better. 3 years is good. 1 month is tough. 6 months is usually enough to build some opposition. So of course, I couldn't have done this. NPCA couldn't have done this on our own. So the more community you can get plugged in, the better. Hold rallies, hold events, go table at your local community park, at fairs, get out in the community and raise awareness. The more people that are opposed sort of around the county, the better, right? You're better served if your opposition is, particularly if your local government, which a lot of them are broken into districts, right? Um, you don't want all of your opposition to come from one district because if you can convince, maybe you can convince that board of supervisors to vote no, but if the other four of them vote yes, you've still lost. So spread your opposition, spread your community awareness around, build opposition across the county, not just right near the project. Delay them as much as possible. This comes back to that timeline thing. FOIA them at every corner. Slow them down. FOIA takes time. Ask them to go through their emails. Ask them to submit documents. Use the tools that you have available. Demand public hearings. Demand that the developer do town halls. Use the tools at your disposal to roll roadblocks in front of them. Elections matter, right? If there's the opportunity to have primary elections or major, or full board of supervisors elections, get people on the record and do what you can to change their mind. And if they don't, maybe it's time you need better representation. Force mistakes, make forced errors. The longer it takes, that clock gets down. Maybe they don't have the votes that they're going to at the end of the year, et cetera, et cetera. Force mistakes. And this is where, one of the earlier slides was from a legal representation. Early is better, right? Like as soon as you hear about a project that you want to stop, it's not a bad idea to consult with an attorney, and that individual can guide you on the things that you should be looking for, the documents that they should be able or are legally required to be able to provide. A good attorney will guide you on your steps for like how to force error. So for instance, the people that went down to the county planning office and requested the full slate of rezoning documents did so because an attorney said, "Hey, I have a hunch those aren't going to be available. They're supposed to be. Go ask for them and see." Um, so having an attorney guiding you on, they're not going to do a lot of these things for you. You're going to have to do them, but having an attorney who can guide you on some of these steps, on some of these errors that they are likely to make under pressure, and then of course document those errors. And then, of course, stay with it. This is fighting data centers is truly David versus Goliath, but David wins in the end. So stick with it, uh, get out there. And in conclusion, I think on my last slide, which has no words, I can stop talking now. It's all about building community. It's all about building opposition and showing opposition. Get out and vote. Vote in your local elections. For data centers, local elections matter more than anything. And make your voice heard. Show up. And I do believe that the tide is turning on this industry and they know it. I think approvals are becoming harder and harder to come by, and we should be leveraging that at every turn to stop bad projects. So with that, thank you.
All right. And there's also some resources that Kyle provided. I'll leave this up here for just a moment. But thank you, Morgana. Thank you, Angie. Thank you, Kyle, so much for being here tonight, providing your experience and your expertise. We are going to move on to the questions portion of the webinar. We have quite a few questions that we received ahead of time. We'll also answer questions in the chat. I'm also putting email contact information for all of our presenters tonight here. That way, if you do have any particular follow-ups, you want to reach out to them to ask about, you have that information. So to start, the first question is, how can communities prepare in advance? So let's say a data center has not yet been proposed for a community. What should they be doing now to prepare?
I'm happy to jump in on this one. And I
Yeah.
think Kyle also will probably have a good amount to say, but like what Kyle was talking about, some of the biggest advantages is having that long runway. And so getting in as early as possible before approvals are granted is one of the best ways to get a hold of it. And so I think in talking a lot to people where they are worried about this, some of the things that I've come across that can be helpful is one, a lot of planning commissions, county councils, they have agendas, they have websites where they post when meetings will happen, what they will be discussing. If you're able to track that, figure out how you can get notifications for those types of meetings, attend those meetings if they are available to you, getting other people that are concerned about this to attend them. That is very important. Figuring out where your county might update zoning decisions so that you can monitor zoning map amendments or any sort of comprehensive plan updates. Those are ways to kind of initially keep track of what's going on behind the scenes. Again, you might not have all that information that about what's going on behind the scenes, like Kyle was talking about, but at least this way, if there is something, you can kind of track notifications and try to get involved as early as possible before something happens.
Yeah, so I think my thought would be, and this is, I'm going to admit, something that doesn't exist in a lot of places. If your locality doesn't yet have a data center proposal, right? Those are few and far between. But if you live in a locality, maybe it's under a temporary moratorium, maybe you live in a county that a data center developer hasn't eyeballed yet. It's never a bad time to build relationships with your board of supervisor, your local elected official, your town councilor. You can always like developers do this all the time, to be very clear. The planning office is a public building. You can go in and say, "Hi, my name is Kyle. I'd like to meet with the planning director." Build relationships with people. Let them know what you're concerned about and say, "Hey, if a data center, is being talked about, will you send me an email? Will you let me know?" Be in like the way you develop like early insider information is you just be in the know, right? So develop relationships with it doesn't have to be everybody, with like one or two people within local government, and they can be your ear to the ground if, a developer walks through the door. And, we have relationships with folks. I don't have them, but we have partners that have relationships in Prince William County where like it is amazing what they know. They just have people within the county government that will text and be like, "Hey, have you heard that X and X developer is looking at this site for this project?" Like they know before anybody. So develop those relationships, become friends, associates, stay in touch with people, and hopefully they'll keep you in the loop.
Jackie, can I add one
Yeah,
small thing
totally.
to
Yeah,
this?
please, everyone, popcorn,
Yeah.
add your experience.
Yeah, to Kyle's point about making friends, I would say make friends early and often, such as we vote, because 2 years ago I was walking around the halls of Montgomery County government trying to get any of those legislators to bite on doing a zoning text amendment or a ZTA on data centers. And for most of them, they're like, "Hey, Angie, we don't really think this is going to come to Montgomery County. We're really expensive. Our energy is really expensive. This is never really going to come to us." And now they're passing an 18-month moratorium when this is an issue that we've been trying to drag. So I think this is an issue that will touch every single county. And if it hasn't touched your county, then the first time to have a conversation with someone about data center development was yesterday. The second best time is tomorrow, or as soon as you can get on someone's schedule, just to start seeing what exactly they think about data center development.
Awesome. So the next question is a combination of several questions, and essentially what is being asked is how can one find out about looming data center projects, and how do you keep up with information on projects?
Submit a FOIA. I don't know if Maryland, I assume Maryland does. Angie, shake your head if they don't, has some sort of public disclosure that applies to like local government officials, right? No?
I don't think so. Because, well, not, wait, finish the end of your sentence and then I can shake my head.
Yeah, so in Virginia, I'll just say Virginia, so there's FOIA, the word that everybody knows, Freedom of Information Act applies to like it's a federal law that applies to federal officials. Virginia has Virginia Freedom of Information Act that applies to all state government elected officials and all county, like it's across the state. If you are, a public representative, you are sort of blanketly under this law. And so you can FOIA, most local governments have a FOIA officer and will have an email address, and you can say, I would like any records relating to, I mean, you can keep it broad, right, to any data center project or any developer in this county. Now, the broader your FOIA request is, it will often come with a fee. So be prepared that they might charge you $100 or even $500. If you're super narrow and you know a little bit of information, like you heard, your birdie in the local government told you that a Google developer was coming to town and you know a time range for when that was, you could say, I want any communications with Google or their subsidiaries in this date range. And that's usually pretty easy to pull. So if you're like, anybody that's a data center developer of any kind in any date range, that's going to take some time and probably some money for them to pull. But it is publicly available. So if you're willing to pay the fee and wait a little bit, they can pull all of that information. So I lean on FOIA for finding out information if the county is not being transparent.
Thanks, Cal. Yeah, Morgana, would you like to speak to Maryland's equivalent?
Yes, I was just going to say, and I think a few of the chats have already beat me to this, but Maryland has the Public Information Act. We can do the same thing where you can ask for requests, you can ask for waivers in certain situations. But yes, there are PIA liaisons for different counties, different agencies that you can FOIA or PIA information about data centers. There's also the Open Meetings Act, which I believe Pat DeArmy, one of our attorneys, just referenced.
Yeah, I'm glad the chat was more knowledgeable to Kyle's question than I was. But yeah, the Maryland PIA process is quite honestly, I thought it was we've done one once and reaching out to an ombudsman if you are confused about the PIA process is really helpful. So in addition to getting legal support, you can also reach out to their ombudsman. But yeah, as Kyle said, they may charge you. I did a very large PIA request and it was I think they wanted to charge us $1,200, to which I said, I don't need the information that much. But in order to know about the PIA request, I think the step beforehand is subscribe to your local newspaper. Those folks are running around and trying to figure out when legislators are taking meetings with developers. So I've gotten quite a few hits just from reporters.
In building on that, Angie, sorry, I know this is, but
No, keep going. It's great.
speaking about developing relationships, develop a relationship with your local reporter. And sometimes they'll do the FOIA for you and they'll pay the fee because they have a budget to do that kind of thing. So if you have a hot tip from your little birdie in the local government and you can go to a local reporter that you're friends with and say, hey, I heard that there's some wheeling and dealing happening. I submitted a FOIA and they want $1,200. Can you give it a try? Sometimes that will break things open.
I also just wanted to add more generally, it may be a bit behind these previous tactics that we just talked about, but there are a lot of data center trackers that are out there. If you just Google data center trackers, that might be privy to something that you're not. So definitely keep an open eye on those like mapping things, because a lot of really wonderful organizations have done a lot of research on where things are popping up.
Awesome. Thank you all. So I'm going to move to the chat for a couple presentation specific questions. Angie, there is a question for you. The law that sets a different threshold to accommodate for larger data center load, what is to stop developers from simply building several smaller distributed data centers? Does it aggregate?
That's a good question, especially because perhaps during my presentation, I should have caveated with the fact that a lot of our conversations is focused on hyperscale data centers, which we are defining as over 20 to 25 megawatts. Data centers have been around since the dawn of the internet, and they have been a large server room on the floor of a building, and those are not the data centers that we are as concerned about because they just are not as much of a resource hog as the generative AI data centers that are blanketing Northern Virginia. So in terms of your question about uh, distributing data centers, so smaller data centers, if it's under 20 megawatts, are not as much of a concern for us. But in our experience, when someone is developing a data center campus, those are all uh, part of the permitting process, often as their own building. So, but it does aggregate in terms of what the law says for the large load registry. That's an aggregate. But when it comes to permitting, those are site by site by site. I hope that answered your question, Alex. If not, I can dive into it more later.
Great. So another question we had, can county code in Virginia include a blanket exclusion of NDAs?
I think so, but I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe it depends. I feel like that's a research question that we'll have to come back to you on.
You
But that
have some counties that are openly saying that they will refuse to sign NDAs. Um, so in a sense, it's signing an NDA is a choice, right? Um, so I think that, you leverage utilize the same sort of levers that you have in all local government, which is like public pressure to say, we expect you to not sign non-disclosure agreements. Um, I haven't heard of sort of a county passing a code that prohibits non-disclosure agreements. And to be honest with you, it is so common across all industries. I would be surprised if there was a county that would be willing to do that. Um, I could be wrong.
going back to FOIA, what should people ask? How do they figure out what to ask for in a FOIA? Any guidance on that? Yeah, go ahead.
I can kick us off very briefly, but if you have the name of the staffer or the elected official that might have been meeting, and if you have the time frame, those are all really important things. And try to get a very specific phrase in which to FOIA. Um, Otherwise, it just gets huge and unaffordable. Sorry, Morgana, I saw you come off mute.
No, you're good. That's great. I just want to address two things. We talked about earlier getting like communications about the data center. If people are worried about the fees that come with that, that can be where a lot of those fees rack up. So if you want to be more specific about like non-communication or separate that as a different FOIA request, that can be a way to get the information more quickly and also without racking up a lot of fees. I think particularly for like concerns with water, I think something to ask about that will help with like transparency issues that I think would be good information for anyone to be asking about these projects is where's the water coming from? How much would be used? How much would be used annually or how much would be used on a daily basis? What's going to happen during drought restrictions? Just finding specifics to try to wherever you have confusion of what's going on with the project, asking questions about those can be very helpful. So if you have particular concerns about water, digging through questions about water usage and what could happen there is good.
And while we're talking about the cost of things, there was a question in the chat about, aren't lawyers expensive? Morgana, could you speak to that? What could people do?
Some lawyers are expensive, yes, but you can also come to folks like CLA. We are a nonprofit law firm, so all of our work is pro bono. We do not charge for our services, and so we do some work in-house, but my task is trying to find pro bono attorneys throughout the Chesapeake Bay watershed to assist on matters like this. It can be difficult to find pro bono attorneys to work on these projects, but there are a lot of folks out there that are just as concerned as you and want to put their legal skills to use. So please do get in contact with me and we will do our best to try to find someone who can assist on these projects. But yeah.
Yeah, and this is a QR code that links straight to the pro bono intake form if you are interested in reaching out for assistance. Angie, I have another presentation specific question for you that came up in the chat. Is speculating like changing gas prices?
I might be misunderstanding the question, but when I talk about the speculative nature of the data center industry, I would compare it more so to the 2008 mortgage crisis, where data centers right now are feeling a lot of love from investors and from the largest multinational corporations in the world. And developers and contractors and all of these folks are building data centers because there is just such a great demand for their servers. However, if that demand has been overinflated or has been perhaps juiced up for the sake of investor reports, then when all of those servers and those data centers are built, they will I was going to say lay fallow, but that sounds really biblical. But they will remain empty and but their impact on the grid and their impact on water resources will have already been felt. So, in terms of like the speculative nature, that's what I'm talking about. And I think in other cases, people will call it like the AI bubble.
And there's also in Virginia a lot of questions about, and this is really complicated. So on one hand, you have kind of what Angie was talking about, like the AI bubble and how much of this data center demand is quite frankly like real and durable and long term. Like, will we need the level of development that we're talking about in the future? The other thing when we think of speculative is because there is so much demand at the moment, a company will go into three or four different areas, three or four different states, and essentially, without telling anybody, pitch the same project to three different local governments. And whoever approves them the first is like the winner, if you will, right? And so they'll go through some of these processes and they might even go as far to get a rezoning because like in the grand scheme of things at the level of financial investment that we're talking about, like getting a rezoning is cheap. And so they'll jump through all of those hoops and maybe there isn't actually a project to be built on the back end. And so there's like speculative on that sense where you have real estate developers who are jumping through all of these hoops saying, hey, we have a project. They don't actually have an end customer. It's like, we'll figure that out later.
So a couple questions related to data center moratoriums. What are some main points that a moratorium should include in order to be effective? And also, Kyle, this one's for you. Is there any possibility of a data center moratorium in Virginia? Angie's laughing.
Um,
Sorry, Kyle.
Not a good one.
Yeah.
I can start the what's a
That would
good
be
thing to
great.
look for
Yep.
in a moratorium. I maybe this is because I'm a pessimist, but I like to see what conditions need to be filled for it to end. So is it just a time limit? I've seen some moratoria that are incumbent on some sort of a regulation or legislative change, then the moratoria will be lifted. You also need to check, as is the case in Prince George's County, if the moratoria includes other provisions that are actually much more data center friendly. For example, the ones in Prince George's County, it opens up two more zones for data center development. So don't take a moratorium for what it is at face value. I know last General Assembly there was a moratorium that was really just a co-location for gas and coal. So actually read the bill is always a good thing, but I would say see what the ending clause is.
Yeah, I've been talking about this a lot recently, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the Virginia moratorium because personally, I don't think the political winds are there for a statewide moratorium. I'd love to be proven wrong, but we are where we are. I'm just telling you what I see. Um, you might see like individual local governments attempt to enact something that resembles a moratorium. I believe Virginia's I still haven't honestly gotten a straight answer on this about whether state law allows a county to do sort of a quote moratorium. What they can do is just remove it from the zoning language. So essentially it's just not an allowed usage. That doesn't keep somebody from submitting an application. And then the county planning office would have to go, buddy, read the sign. We don't allow data centers here. But I believe technically counties aren't on paper allowed to do a moratorium, but that's anyways. So what makes a good moratorium, I think, is both what Angie said, like what's in it, but also like what are you trying to get out of it, right? Do you want a permanent, forever, no data centers in this county ever under any circumstances moratorium? Because like that's different than what I like to like call a pause and plan, right? Are you doing a 12-month moratorium while county planning staff and the board of supervisors do a really deep dive on stringent standards for this industry? Those are two totally different things. And so, like, as a community, I would encourage folks, and I can't speak for y'all, I can't speak for any individual community. Like, I would encourage folks to come together and say, like, what's our end objective here? Is it we could live with a data center or two if it's done to the letter on this exact thing in these exact spots? Or is it we don't want any of them anywhere ever? Those are two different things. So, what makes a good moratorium is what the community wants out of it.
Those are great responses. Thank you both. So we just have a couple minutes left, and I wanted to shift slightly into, again, we had several questions sort of related to what can I do? And so how can people get involved in data center reform, particularly students, aspiring environmental advocates, and do things like protests and rallies really help?
Well, for students, volunteers, there are a lot of organizations, including the ones that you see here on this that are presenting right now that are working on this. Reach out to those organizations, see if there is a way that you could get involved. I know at least with CLA, we always welcome volunteers if they want to work on research projects. However, they want to get involved, you can get in touch with me and I'd be happy to discuss ways to get you involved. Um, as for the question on protests, I would never say that that would hinder anything. I mean, it would obviously call attention to it. You would be able to get more people looking at it, press. You'd be able to get more um, eyes on your opinions, and you'd get to obviously the developer would know that there is opposition through that. Is protest alone going to stop the data center? Probably not, but definitely helps and is something to get done. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Morgana. So it is 7 o'clock. So I want to give each of you a chance to say any closing remarks, and then we will conclude. Starting with Morgana.
Thank you very much for having me. Please do either email me or submit a request for legal assistance, and I will set up an intake call. We can talk about this. We can talk about ways to get involved. I would be happy to answer any further questions. And thank you very much for attending, everybody.
Angie.
Thank you so much to CLA for putting this on, and I'm always excited to talk to a new and different group of folks. And yeah, the data center fight is going to take all of us, and there are plenty of pieces of pie to go around, so don't be worried if you're not a legal expert. I'm clearly not. I forgot what a PIA was called on this call. But it takes all types, so hopefully we'll see you out there.
And Kyle.
Yeah, once again, thanks to Chesapeake Legal Alliance for putting this on, and thanks to everybody who took time this evening to join. I think I'm going to end on a positive note, which is like it's working, right? This opposition, I I was there. I don't want to call it like at the beginning because I work with people that were there at the beginning, but like to a lot of the people that are like in sort of the data center fight, I was there on the ground floor and I know how far we've come, and I know what it looked like to be fighting data centers 5 years ago versus to be fighting them now. And we are winning this war hand over fist. Moratoriums in counties in Maryland, legislation passing in both general assemblies, serious discussions about ending tax breaks. Um, Keep the pressure on, keep fighting. We like in the end, we will win. We have them on the run. So keep up the good work.
And with that, thank you everyone for coming tonight. Please be on the lookout in your email for the recording, and share it with your family and friends. And as Kyle said, keep fighting. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all. Bye bye.